Okay, well, it is 1 o'clock. Welcome, everyone. There might be some more people floating or jumping in, hopping in. We're in that platform soon. My name is Celine Kovalik, and I am the tech support person for this workshop, which is on Maria. Tell me the title again.
It's an overview of our Family Thrives curriculum.
Yeah, so Family Thrives curriculum, which will show us, how to help children flourish, really connecting to our main presenter, Donna Nakazawa. I am not a super tech person, but if anyone is having any technical difficulties, I know who to contact and they will zip in and help you or me or Maria. So feel confident in that. And so letting you know that, and without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Maria, and she will begin the presentation. So thank you for being here, Maria. I'm looking forward to hearing it all the way through. I got like a little preview the other day, and it was really interesting in fast motion. So I'm settling in to really pay attention today.
Okay. So can you just tell them how to use the chat and the Q&A?
Absolutely. Thank you. So the chat is up there to the right. You'll see two words, session and event. And you want to make sure the blue line is under session, because then you'll have access to the chat and see who is in here. You can click on people and see the names of the folks who are in the session with us. And at any time during the session, you can go ahead and post a question to the Q&A, and Maria will be answering those at the end. And as you saw, if you were here for the main event, when people post to the Q&A, if you too have that question, you can like it so we can know which questions are most important, and they can bubble up to the top, and she can make sure that she answers them for you. And if there's anything you need to ask me or Maria, you can pop that in the chat, and I'll be monitoring that throughout. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll be sharing my screen now. Okay, once again, good afternoon. My name is Maria Long, and I'm going to be your facilitator for this session this afternoon, where we're going to be talking about Families Thrive overview. And basically, this is going to be a quick synopsis because this course normally runs anywhere from between 2 and 4 days. So I really struggle with how it is I could give you enough information, just kind of an overview of what it really entails. But it's really all about these things that we call protective and promotive factors to enhance thriving for all children, youth, and families. So once again, I want to welcome you all to this session. Keep in mind that once again, it's a high-level overview of this course. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about who should take the training, who should take it, parents, caregivers, communities, service providers. This training really is for anybody that comes into contact with children and youth. We're going to talk about why this training is important in terms of the power of these protective and promotive factors to enhance what? Thriving, to talk about the fact that they're going to be mitigators for child abuse and neglect, and also they're going to promote well-being and health for our children and our families. We're going to give you a little bit of information about the history of this course. This course really is a product of combining two different courses that are offered by the Center for the Study of Social Policy. There's a course called Strengthening Families. There's another course called Youth Thrive. They both have an emphasis for young children, adolescents. We put them together, and now this course really talks about, from an overall perspective, from birth to emerging adult, what these protective factors look like and the power of them. And then we're going to also talk about these things called guiding premises, which really talks about the power of how it is we bring ourselves to this work. Just a little bit about myself. I have a degree, my undergrad degree is in business administration. I have a master's of education. Worked in corporate America for over 35 years in various capacities with lots in change management, training, facilitation, business processing, just lots of different things. But the most important thing that really brings me to the table today is about 8 years ago, I came into this new field that I'm calling Health and Human Services. I do a lot of training now around maternal, child, youth, and family health health, adverse childhood experiences, trauma, protective and promotive factors, and cultural diversity. But the most important thing today is that I come as a certified trainer in terms of the Strengthening Families Protective Factors, the Youth Thrive training, as well as this Families Thrive training, which once again are all products from the Center for the Study of Social Policy. Want to do a quick shout out to our sponsors, to the Valencia College's Peace and Justice Institute for allowing me to be one of the speakers and to allow me to really to do this workshop, because this workshop really is important to me. It speaks to my heart, because when I became acquainted with the Strengthening Families Protective Factors, which was the first course I was certified in over 8 years ago, it completely changed the way I saw myself as a mother, even though my kids are grown and gone. But more importantly, it impacted the way that I saw myself as a grandmother. How it is I gained all of these skills and this knowledge that really made me come to the table as a different person, a better grandmother, a better mother, even just a better person in terms of dealing with other people's children, and really being able to integrate those learnings in terms of these personal protective factors into everything that I do, into how I bring myself to the table, how I integrate that into my passion for this training. And then also want to thank the Center for the Study of Social Policy, because once again, they own this curriculum. At this point, I'm just going to quickly go over our group agreements. Why are they important? They're important because for some of you, what you're going to be hearing is completely new. It may be information that possibly might challenge how you even see yourself in terms of how you implement your current practice. For some of you, some of this information may be difficult. Hopefully not, but if so, we want you to make sure that you take care of your needs, and we'll talk about that one quickly. But for the other ones, we need this to be a safe place, a safe space. We need this to be, I always say, a sacred place where we can bring ourselves to the table, where we can really learn how it is that we individually and collectively, what it is we can bring to the table to help support our families, our communities, and most importantly, it will cause us to reflect and grow ourselves. And that's the part that I love. So our group agreements will be today. I hope that you will be willing to listen to learn versus to answer, that you will be willing to try on new ideas and concepts. And sometimes that will require you to challenge old ideas and behaviors with kindness. I want this once again to be a safe place where hopefully you will think and reflect and really to learn about some of the things that I'll be sharing with you today. I hope that you're willing to step outside of your comfort zone, and that you will lean into that discomfort, because we can only grow in our areas of discomfort. I'm hoping that you will go into the Q&A. If there's questions that you have, that you will put them in there. We will have an opportunity that Celine will be monitoring that, but at the end, hopefully I'll be able to respond to those questions and answers. Most importantly, I need you to take care of your needs during this next 90 minutes that we'll be sharing together, whatever that looks like, whether they're your physical needs, your emotional needs, your mental needs, and or your spiritual needs. Take care of yourself. That is one of the most important things that I'm asking of you today. And last but not least, I need this to be a judgment-free zone. Leave your judgments at the door so that will not inhibit the things that you will hear, and possibly all of the wonderful things that you'll be able to learn and to grow and to share with your families as well as yourself. So there's lots of things that I could talk about, but these are some of that I call Maria's key messages, that as I go out throughout this work, as I've been doing this training for the last almost 9 years, these are the things that I've come to just know that are so important. So the first one talks about that families are the experts on their families. That means that we are not, that we need to look to them to say, what are the things that are most important to your family? What are the priorities? How is it that your parenting looks like and feels like? And how it is that we need to be able to work with them to understand what this family dynamic looks like. Families are not broken, and it's not our job to fix them. They're not broken. It's our job, to help them increase what I call their capabilities and capacities to be better parents, to be better people, to be better caregivers. Whatever that role is, we bring ourselves to the table to help really to increase, once again, the capabilities and the capacities of the adults that are responsible for our children and our youth. We need to keep in mind every single thing that I talk about. We talk about the fact that each family is distinct and unique and has their own story and or culture. This is so important. We have to understand that. We have to embrace that. There's no one size fits all. There's nothing that we can bring to the table that we know would suit every single family. So it really becomes our responsibility, to the extent that's possible, to learn as much about what the family story is, what that culture looks like, and how it is that when we bring ourselves to the table to bring together products and services, what do those look like that they are culturally appropriate and on target for that family. Strength-based means that we're not looking for the things that families are doing wrong. No, we are always, and I want to say always, trying to find out what are those things that parents are doing right? What are those things that the caregivers are doing right? And how is it that we can make them feel good about those things? How do we capitalize on those things so that we can really begin to forge a healthy and productive partnership with our parents? Family Thrive focuses on what? Strengthening families, infant, youth, family, and community well-being, and provides tools for all families to thrive. Family Thrive is not just for families that you think that are at risk, that are poverty-stricken, or that have all these issues. When we talk about these protective factors, they apply across the board. I don't care how much money you have. I don't care what neighborhood you live in. I don't care how many credentials you got in front of your name and back of your name. These are protective and promotive factors that will help you be a better parent, caregiver, once again, whatever that role is in terms of your interfacing with our children and our youth. So these are Maria's key messages. So at this point, we're going to watch this movie, and it's called Building Adult Capabilities to Improve Child Outcomes. So one of the things that I always talk about is I talk about the fact that, so why are we here today? And if you know the why, then the what, in terms of what it is you bring to the table, what it is that's important to you, the what becomes so much more important, because at that point, what it is, you are walking and talking into your purpose. So one of the things I say each day when I get up in the morning, that I thank God that I am at a point in my life where I'm able to walk in my purpose. And my purpose is to share every bit of knowledge, all the things that I have learned each and every day, in terms of me training, educating, working with families, working with service providers, no matter who it is I work with. I'm walking in my purpose because I'm able to share all the things that I've learned. So I want us to watch this movie together. It's just a 5-minute video, but it is so powerful because it talks about why it's important that we build adult capacities to improve child outcomes. So please pay attention.
The social challenges that face modern societies, whether it's the ability to work productively, to be a good citizen, stay healthy, have their roots in early health and development. A strong foundation in early childhood results in much better and more effective development later. A weak foundation really puts us behind. The most important thing children need to thrive is to live in an environment of relationships that begins in their family, but also extends out to include adults who are family neighbors and childcare centers and other programs. What children need is that entire environment of relationships to be invested in their healthy development. We've shown from decades of testing interventions that we can improve outcomes. But the magnitude of those impacts is not good enough. Science is now available to help us think about what we might do that would have a bigger impact than the best of what we've done before. So we began to ask, what could we be doing differently? What could we do to be smarter? Children who are at the greatest risk for the poorest outcomes in learning and health and behavior are children who experience a pile, a cumulative burden of one after another of risk factors. And then the burden is more than any child could be expected to overcome. So we began to focus on the development of the adults. What could we be doing to strengthen the capacity of everyone who interacts with children? This led us to think about the kinds of skills you need to deal with adversity. These skills of focusing attention, planning, monitoring, delaying gratification, being able to solve problems, being able to work in teams, executive function, and self-regulation. They're also the kind of skills you need to create a well-regulated home and school environment in which healthy development and learning can take place. And then brain science started to tell us that differences in those skills start to develop in infancy based on the environment kids live in. So how do those skills get built? Well, if you don't develop them early, how do you develop them later? Actually, you can build them later because the period of flexibility and plasticity for this part of the brain doesn't fully mature until age 25 to 30. Went on. The reason we're not getting a bigger impact is not because we don't know about how to influence development, but because we're giving information and advice to people who we need to do active skill building with. Skill building by coaching, by training, by practice. But we're not doing that. So we now have developed this theory of change that says we need to focus on the development of the adults who are important in kids' lives.
So try this.
How does that work?
That's a new idea. Buen trabajo.
We need to focus on their skills, their needs, in order for them to be better, more effective parents, in order for them to be better prepared to be employable, which would enhance the economic stability of the family, which is also good for children. Second of all, we looked at many people in preschool programs and childcare centers. And we said, what are we doing to build those skills in the providers? They need skill building as well. And also the community can help to build and reinforce the capacities that parents need. And the community also includes programs in which the people who work in the programs have sufficient skills. Third of all, what are the major sources of toxic stress in this community and how can we reduce them? Moving it up to a policy level, how are our policies strengthening communities' abilities to reduce source of toxic stress and caregivers' abilities to provide what kids need? The development of our human capital is our future. The development of a productive workforce is our future. The development of a healthy population is our future. This kind of future orientation is critical for healthy society. It's critical for a thriving business. It's critical for successful environmental relationships to raise children. It's all about being able to plan for the future, to have a future. And that's why this is so important.
Okay, so I was just basically giving you a wrap up in terms of what the video showed. And the video really talked about the importance of the ways that we can individually and collectively work to improve the capabilities and capacities of the adult as a means to improve child outcomes. And that's really what this is all about. There was some powerful, I think, and great information included in the video. It talked about the importance of active skill building, talked about the idea of how it is we need to reduce toxic stress individually and collectively across our communities. It talked about a little bit about brain science. It talks about, once again, how it is that we go about building adult and human capital. So why are we here? First of all, I believe with every fiber of my being that we are here because all of us have chosen to come to this work, because this work is important to us, because we do want to find a way to bring about caring, relationship support. How is it that we can really provide our parents tools that would help them to be better parents, better caregivers, and all those other things? we need to look at the idea of, I believe that we're here because we want to what? Change the life of, I call a child or a youth or an adult. And sometimes just the information that we share, sometimes the relationship that we're in with that individual does just that. And we know that if you change the trajectory of a child's life, that you are in fact changing not only that child's life, but you are in fact changing generations to come. And I believe that most importantly, that we know each and every day that when we do this work, we do change lives. And that's what it's all about. We are here. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit quickly about our learning goals for today's session. We're going to learn about the framework. We're going to learn about what are those guiding premises that really talk about how it is we bring ourselves to the table. We're going to understand what are the components or those 5 protective and promotive factors, not only what they are, but how is it that they really promote development and well-being, not only of our youth, but really of our adults. And then at the end, I'm going to quickly provide you a list of resource links from, once again, the Center for the Study of Social Policy, who owns the curriculum Strengthening Families, the Youth Thrive, as well as the Family Thrives curriculum. So those are the things we're going to be doing together today. Okay, so today, quickly, at this point, we're going to talk a little bit about the development of the Families Thrive framework. So in 2003, once again, all of this comes from the Center for the Study of Social Policy. They decided that they wanted to come up with, conduct some research and to really come up with a model in terms of what it is, things that we could do in terms of preventing child abuse and neglect. And this specifically was in the realm of for children ages 0 through 5. In 2008, as a result of having done some research, they launched what we call the Strengthening Families Network. And specifically what they did was they took the research, they came up with an approach, and then when they launched this network, there were basically 8 states that were involved in terms of implementing this model. And basically they worked within the Department of Children and Family Services, because once again, it was strictly based on preventing child abuse and neglect for children between the ages of 0 and 5. But since then, the Strengthening Families Network is now active in 35 states across this nation, and it's being used in a magnitude in a variety of different environments. In 2011, CSSP decided that they were going to, okay, now that we have the model and the approach for 0 to 5, let's look at what we can do in terms of puberty and adolescence. How is that we can come up with a set of those same protective and promotive factors, but what do they look like and what do they feel like? So they started to conduct some research in 2011, and they added the word promotive factors because then they understood not only can these 5 protective factors act as mitigators to child abuse and neglect, but they also can be promotive factors because, once again, they are all about promoting the well-being and health of youth. In 2014, they launched the Youth Thrive training. That was when the first training session were conducted, and I was actually blessed to be a part of one of the very first training sessions. It was absolutely awesome. And ever since then, I've been able to use that information, and Youth Thrive training is based on puberty or adolescence. So it's really ages from maybe 12 to like 24. It kind of goes across that lifespan. And so specifically, that's what that training is geared towards. In 2016, they decided that they were going to take this network, and once again, they were going to do a launching where it was going to be integrated kind of across the country the same way that they did for the Strengthening Families network. And then in 2017, people said that we're dealing with both of them, the Strengthening Families and the Youth Thrive. They said, look, why don't you come up with one class where we can really talk about across the lifespan, what do these promotive and protective factors look like? So in 2013, the Families Thrive curriculum was launched. So that gives you a basic idea of the framework in terms of how it came about. So When we talk about these protective and promotive factors, if you look at the definitions, what does it say? In terms of being a protective factors, the idea is that they are conditions or attributes that what mitigate or eliminate risk. When we talk about them in terms of how they function as protective factors, they talk about the fact that they are what? Conditions or attributes that actively enhance well-being. So with this Families Thrive, once again, each one of these 5 promotive and protective factors that I'm going to be talking about, they really serve both of those purposes. So as you can see, as the promotive and protective factors grow up, the risk factors come down. So they are a mitigator to risk, but more importantly to that, they're also what? Promotive factors that promote well-being and health. So what do we know? What do we know? We know that families, what? It says families gain what they need to be successful when key protective and promotive factors are robust in their lives and community. So what does research tell us? So research really tells us that the absence of child abuse and neglect, strong families, and optimal child development, these are outcomes that are all what? They're tied together. That risk is not predictive because of the influence of these protective and promotive factors in terms of how it is they can mitigate that risk, that you can support the building of these promotive and protective factors in many, many different settings. And that what? Caregivers, parents, including even young parents, can enhance their protective and promotive factors in those of their children. So since we, as well as CSSP, really believes that what it takes a village to raise a child. So one of the things that we promote is that when we implement this protective factors framework, that we really want to do it in opportunity in areas such as community centers, early child care facilities, educational centers, schools, anywhere that are frequented what? By children, youth, and caregivers and their families. We can implement it in a multitude of different providers, services such as child welfare, juvenile justice, and just like I said, across the board. These promotive and protective factors are absolutely awesome. So this is one of the things I want to make sure that everybody understands, that it's an approach, it's not a model, it's not a process, it is an approach. So there were 3 big ideas behind, the protective factor. So one of them was, once again, the idea of that they were promotive and protective factor. That was the previous slide. The second big idea is, once again, that this is an approach. It's not a model. It's not a process. So what does that mean? That means it is not, listen carefully, it is not an evidence-based program. Rather, it is an evidence-informed program that can be adapted to what? Many, many different settings and service delivery modes. So Families Thrive is implementing what we call small but significant changes in terms of how it is that we as professionals, how it is that we interface and interact and support our families. It's not parallel to anything else, but really what we talk about is how it is you can use those protective factors and integrate them into whatever your existing practice is, the method of how you integrate them. It can be applied in any setting across the board, just because, once again, it's so fluid. It's an approach. It's not a model, not a process. And then we talk about the fact that it is relevant to anyone who works with young children, young people, families, caregivers, including people across the board, the public child welfare administrators, supervisors, caseworkers, teachers, private agencies, nonprofit agencies, judges. Is being used in the legal system, is used by parents, caregivers, you name it. These protective factors can be used absolutely across the board. So then when we look at these protective factors, so you see all these different, I call different service providers, and all these may be at some point that different families come to them. Each of one of them has their own products and services in the way that they provide services to their clients. There's no common language, there's no common communication sometimes between them, amongst them. So families can go to one organization, they can use a certain terminology that, this is what we're going to provide. A different agency can provide the same thing, use different terminology. There's no coordination. So what we say is we would like everyone to be trained on these promotive and protective factors. So what? So that we can have a common language, a common way of communicating the power and the strength of these protective factors, and how it is, no matter what agency that you represent, you can integrate them into your existing practices. So it really becomes a beautiful framework in terms of how it is that we can start working together collectively as a service industry, or a group of, collective organizations that are all concerned about families, but really so the families have a better idea of what do these protective factors mean, whether I'm talking about them within the juvenile justice, whether I'm talking about them from a family resource center, whether I'm talking about them from a mental health perspective. They still have the same meaning. They still mean the same thing, but how it is that we bring them and integrate them into what we're doing. So the third big idea behind this promotive and protective factor in this approach was what? You can read these. I'm not going to read them, but the most important thing that I think talks about how it is that we engage parents. How do we begin to see parents as our partners? That not just, that we're just servicing them as our clients. No, how do we begin that partnership? Because that's what's going to lead to a different kind of relationship. It's going to lead to a relationship where parents realize, they do care what I'm saying. I am a part of the decision making. My priorities are important in terms of when we come up with whether it's a case plan or we come up with a plan of action or whatever that looks like and feels like, that I have been a part of that. So therefore, I don't have to sell you on it, because there's ownership for me, because I'm an active part of putting that plan together. So we talk about the fact that you not only engage them in terms of, the products and services that you're bringing to the table, but also even beyond that, how is it that you can even allow parents to sometimes just become, some people have advisory boards, some people have other ways that they can engage parents in terms of coming within their organization and looking to say, are these really the products and services that the parents that we serve really need? Are we really providing those products and services in a way that makes sense, from a culturally appropriate way, and from all these other things that may be going on? How is it that you even bring parents to the table to look at the way that you're designing and implementing your policies, your products and services? So it's a different mindset. It's a mindset of a true partnership, and that is what I love about this, because when we are in partnership, hopefully from the very beginning, we have come up with some common goals. We've come up with some things that we're going to be working together in partnership to achieve for me, whether it's just as a parent, for my child, or whatever, but it's a partnership. And if we talk about, the fact of what this model really is very much in alignment with developmental science, because basically, when I talk about these promotive and protective factors, I want you to understand they are just another set of what I call parenting skills. They're another set of things that you can put into that toolbox to teach you how to be a better parent, a better caregiver, whatever that role is that you're playing. I'm not telling you to throw away anything else that you have that already worked. You need to keep that. But in the toolbox, you continually add things, or you get rid of things that no longer work. Hopefully this is going to be something that you're going to open up that toolbox and say, these are absolutely wonderful tools that we're going to use. And why? Because these are tools that are going to be the things that are going to talk about the critical periods of development. They talk about the importance of nurturing relationships, and it talks about really the impacts of trauma on development, behavior, and brain. So those are some of the things that these trainings will talk about. I'm not going to talk about those today, all of them, but once again, put these in your toolbox. So I want to once again quickly talk about what the evolution of this family thrive. If you start on your left side where it talks about the strength of family's protective factors, that was the first approach that was put together by the Center for the Study for Social Policy. Those 5 protective factors, once again, we're focusing on children between the ages of 0 and 5. Their parental resilience, social connection, knowledge of parenting and child development, concrete support in times of need, social and emotional competence. So remember we talked about, so after that was a little bit later on, people said, okay, we need something that focuses, strictly on youth. So when we talk about youth, those are children that are going through puberty, adolescence, and even possibly emerging adults. So you see, there's a little bit of shift in terms of the verbiage. We went from parental resilience to what does it look like for youth resilience. We talk about the difference in terms of what those social connections look like in those 2 different groups. We've gone from knowledge of parenting and child development, so now we're talking about we need to understand, what does adolescent development look like and feel like? We talk about concrete support in times of need. Once again, that looks a little bit different. And then we go from social and emotional competencies of children to what? Cognitive and social and emotional competencies in youth. So now, after we had those two, once again, there was a need that we want one curriculum that's going to include both of those that will go across the lifespan. So that is how we got to our Families Thrive. And this really talks about what? From infancy, or from 0 all the way through the emerging youth. So those protective factors are going to be knowledge of child and adolescent development, social connections in times of need. It's going to talk about cognitive and social and emotional competence. It's going to talk about concrete support in times of need. And it just talks about resilience across the board. So what's the goal of this Families Thrive? The goal is what? Key, to disseminate information to caregivers, family, youth, and communities about how it is we can support and promote healthy development, because we want our children to what? To grow into successful, productive, and caring members of society. That's the goal of when we teach these promotive and protective factors. And it's what? It's another way that we provide a way for our service providers, regardless of who they are, and or these these child welfare agencies, to translate the federal mandates that they've been given. You have to come up with all these positive outcomes. Well, look, this is one way to help you do that. When we talk about the framework, you can quickly read this yourself, but what it says, we talk about, whereas the traditional response really kind of always looks at how it is that we can stop maltreatment from continuing to occur. However, with the idea behind the Families Thrive is we don't want it to begin. We don't even want the maltreatment to begin. So it's what? To stop child abuse and neglect, and to promote well-being and outcomes. So if we are able to do that, it's going to benefit the families. Once again, we're going to talk about, we go back to what? Building on family strength. That is absolutely so critical and so important that we have got to understand. Okay? Talks about promoting optimal child and adolescent development, reduces likelihood of child and adolescent abuse and neglect. It can be implemented through small but significant changes in everyday actions. Once again, you integrate it into your existing, and so it's grounded in research, practice, and implementation knowledge. So now let's talk a little bit about these guiding premises. So there's going to be 6 guiding premises. If you look at the top, it says these protective and promotive factors. There's 5 of them. I've already told you what they are: child and adolescent development, social connections, cognitive and social emotional competence, concrete support in times of need, and resilience. So now we're going to talk about these guiding premises, because the the protective and promotive factors are what we bring to the table, but these guiding premises, I love them. Talks about how it is we bring ourselves to the table, how it is we bring these protective factors to the table, and how it is that we support and share them with our families. So let's talk about these guiding premises. There are 6 of them. So quickly, I'm going to read them. It says children, youth, and caregivers are best supported by people who understand and recognize the importance of self-awareness and self-care in their own professional practice. Once again, at the top of the list, self-awareness and self-care. You've got to understand how it is you need to take care of yourself first and foremost if you're going to bring yourself fully to the table. Take care of yourself. Know what that looks like and feels like. The next one. Children, youth, and families are best supported by people who what? Understand the impact of traumatic stress and understand the need to use trauma-informed practice methods. So we talk about the whole idea of what this trauma-informed, you go from a shift from what? Why is this person behaving this way to now what happened to this person, and how that totally changes the way that you see them, you see yourself. But you've got to understand, what does that look like and feel like, once again, when you bring yourself to the table. The third one, children, youth, caregivers are best served by people who what? Focus on assets and use strength-based approaches. I love that. Come to the table with strength-based approaches, with this an awareness of current research regarding neuroscience and child and adolescent development. We need to understand this brain science, how it works from the very beginning to the end of our life, and what does that look like, and what's the impact in terms of that on our child and adolescent development. And we need to understand when we talk about child and adolescent development, what are those milestones? What do we mean when we talk about ages and stages? Why is that important? The next one, children, youth, and caregivers are best supported by people who understand that attachments, connections, and relationships are the primary source of growth and learning. It is through these relationships that we experience, listen to this, ourselves. We are able to learn. We're able to practice new skills. We're able to receive feedback and grow as human beings. Everything we do is a result of some sort of a relationship, whether it is a personal relationship or a professional relationship. Think about it. There's nothing that you can do in isolation. The next one, children, youth, and caregivers are what? Best supported by people who understand the role of race, racism, and bias, and the ways in which race, other identities, privilege, and or power shape their life as well as the practitioner's own life. One of the things we do throughout the class is we always come back to, do we really understand the idea of culture and diversity, and how does that impact, once again, the families that we're serving? What does that look like and feel like? What is our view of our own race, ethnicity, and how does that impact the way we bring ourselves to the table? Last but not least, children, youth, and caregivers are best supported by people who understand and provide culturally responsible services. It gives you a definition. What does that mean? It means that we take into account our culture, the culture of those individuals and families that we serve, the culture of the larger community in which they live, and what? This is key because sometimes we don't even think about it. The culture that is created within our own programs and organizations. How do all these different types of culture, once again, impact the way that we're able to support our families, the products and services that we provide to them? Are they culturally responsive and appropriate? So in summary, these 6 guiding premises, what? They give us a good idea of what we need to consider in terms of how we do this work. How do we bring ourselves to the table? How is it that we interact with? How is it that we communicate with? How do we serve our families, our caregivers, our communities? They focus on our need to what? To be cognizant of the power of who we are, what that means, the power of relationships, the power of culture, and really the power of using what I'm going to keep coming back to, that strength-based approach. This is so important that we understand them, because when we look at, once again, at these guiding premises, they talk about how we bring ourselves to this work. And sometimes I believe the how is more important than what you bring. How do you bring it? So now we're going to talk about the next 2. We're going to understand what these 5 components of the Family Thrive curriculum are and discuss each one of them. And once again, keep in mind, this is a quick snippet of this of each one of these protective factors. They are, once again, knowledge of child and adolescent development, social connections, cognitive and social and emotional competence, concrete supports in times of need, and resilience. So let's start off with our first one. Our first one talks about what? Knowledge of child and adolescent development. So when we, in this module, normally within the class, we talk about how children's brain develops from birth through adolescence. And really we talk about how trauma can impact that development. But more importantly than that, then we talk about the whole idea of what is the notion of child and adolescent development. Okay, it really talks about first of all, what's not mentioned here is that really also talks about what they talk about, these parenting skills. So what are the kinds of skills that we really need that will enable us, once again, to be the best parents, the best caregivers, whatever that role is that we're playing in the life of this child and adult. So that's not included, but it really is included in terms of our training. But right now, I'm going to focus on the other part where it really talks about knowledge of child and adolescent development. We're really talking about what? We're talking about developmental milestones. We're talking about, some people call them ages and stages. So when I talk about that, we're really talking about how it is that your child at any given physical age what are the things that they should be able to do physically, mentally, emotionally, and from a language perspective. What do those things look like? And once we understand what those things look like, how is it that we need to provide the kind of nurturing that they need within each one of those stages? What are those developmental appropriate expectations? Once again, based on the definition of those milestones and or ages and stages. And how is it that if we understand what those developmental milestones are, how do we make sure that we are providing what I called a supportive environment to make sure that whatever that child needs to meet that milestone or exceed that milestone, that we're making sure that that's present in that child's environment. Another thing that we talk about is how do we effectively manage a child's behavior? That behavior will change depending on, once again, what that developmental milestone or what that ages and stages is in terms of where they are. We need to understand what that looks like and feel like. We need to understand there's a difference between discipline and punishment. And then most importantly, it talks about responsive to a child's specific needs. So one of the things that I talk about all the time in my classes, I believe this from the bottom of my heart, the greatest gift that you can give to your child, I say, is to know your child. And when I'm going to give you a quick example of this, my parents, there were 4 of us, and 3 of us were stair steps. So I was the third of the stair steps. So when my sister was 5, my brother was 4, and I was 3. So what my parents used to do is when something would go wrong in the house, if they didn't know who did it, my parents would whip all of us. So I ended up, because I was the good child, so I ended up getting all these whippings for things I never did. And it used to just make me so angry. And I finally realized that because my parents did not know us, they did not know us well enough to say, based on that, whatever happened, I can kind of narrow it down to it was probably this child, that child, or this other child, but it certainly wasn't the one that never did anything. So when I say know your child better than anybody else will know your child. So when things happen, when people say, your child did this or this happened, you can come back and say, well, that's not normally indicative of my child. Yeah, that sounds like something my child might have. But basically, know your child so that you will be able to respond specifically. I don't care if you have a set of twins, they are going to be different. They may be physically, they can be identical twins. They are not the same. Each child is a beautiful, unique individual. Give that child what they need is for you to know them, to love them the way they need to be loved, to cherish them the way that they need to be cherished. So we already talked about earlier, we talked about we need to understand what this whole developmental neuroscience. We talked about brain science. She talked about it this morning, but we do need to understand that the brain develops, from the ages of 0 to 20. There's a couple significant times when that happens. Really, by the time you're of the age of 5, your child's brain is 90% done. The most important brain growth happens at the age between the first 1,000 days, which is between the ages of birth, of conception, and I think like a couple years later, because that is when the most significant growth happens, because it's like you're starting with a blank screen. And then the next time happens during adolescence. She already talked about the fact that that is a time of profound brain development. The brain grows differently. So there's so much going on. People think that when children are going through puberty and adolescence, that it's all really about the outward physical changes, but no, the most important changes are happening in the brain. That's when those executive functions are kicking in. That's when they really need to be, supported. That's when all of these different things in the brain are happening. So it's so important that we understand what does that look like and feel like, and how is it that we bring ourselves to the table, once again, as parents and caregivers, to make sure that we are providing the things that our children need. I love this. What it says, early childhood is both the most critical and most vulnerable time in any child's development. Why? Because that is when our child, they come here as a blank screen, a blank plate, blank, whatever you want to call it, screen. And that's when all of this, for the first time, when this formation is starting. In terms of intellectually, emotionally, who it is that they're going to be, how it is that we start interfacing with our children from day one, to understand they are little creatures, but even though they're little creatures, they come here with all these emotional needs, physical needs, cognitive needs. How is it that we make sure that those things are being developed in a way that is going to lay the foundation for our children to be able to do the things that they will need to do later on, to be able to grow into what these responsible human beings, citizens of the world is what I call them. So important. It starts from day one, even before birth. So I'm going to just quickly go through these next couple of slides. So when I go through these next couple of slides, think about milestones or ages and stages. So we talk about from an infant and toddler, what does safety look like? So when we talk about what are infants and toddlers doing and learning during this period, you can read this for yourself, but it really just talks about what does safety look like. They are completely, depending on us. There's a lot of touching and being touched. That is so important. The serve and return. We need to soothe our children. When our children are crying, they're not crying just to be crying. They're crying because there's a need. We need to figure out what that need is. They're constantly interaction with our facial expressions. They will even mimic what we do, which is what I love. They start the talking and the babbling. They're very attuned into their texturized when they start touching things. And most importantly, what's at the bottom? Nurturing, but it really should be at the top because they need to be loved and loved and loved. And when they say that you cannot spoil an infant, that is so true. You cannot spoil an infant. So then now as we go to early childhood, once again, what are these children doing and learning during this period? Safety looks a little different because now our kids are becoming more independent. They're now they're attending daycare, Head Start, early child care facilities. They might even be going to school. So once again, this is looking different. Now they're being perhaps exposed to other different kinds of adults. We need to give them opportunity to explore, to have what I love, this guided and imaginative play alone and parallel with others. They say one of the most important ways that you have your child to learn is to play. That was something that I never knew as a mother. I never knew until lately that play learning is more important, they said, than any kind of academic, anything that you can do in terms of just a traditional school setting. They need the ability to run, to jump, to climb, to get out that energy, to be able to use those muscle development. And then I love it, talks about the opportunities to develop new peer and adult relationships because they are now in these much more social settings. It allows them to once again interface with other kids, with more adults, and we need to understand how do we help them understand what does those relationships looks like. And we talk about praise the effort. It says not the achievement, because sometimes our kids will never necessarily meet that achievement the first time, a second go around. But if you praise the effort that goes into that, what are you praising them? That you have done your best, that you have tried your best. That's more important than what you have or have not achieved. Now that we're going to middle childhood, between the ages of 7 and 10, just before we hit puberty, once again, safety may look differently because now, they're becoming their own little people. They're starting that thought, I want my friends. They want to play with their friends and others more than anything at this point. So they're really becoming much more social creatures. And they do this, through a variety of activities. There's a host of them. We need to give them opportunities to learn, to explore, to learn what those new relationships looks like. And just once again, nurturing may look a little bit different. You may not be able to put them in your lap and hug them and kiss them, but there's other ways that you can, hug them and kiss them different ways. So once again, what do these things look like based on the ages of your child? And then the last thing I'm talking just a little bit about is this whole adolescence, because I'm telling you, that is probably the stage more than anything where they're going through some changes. And I think they send us through some changes, whether we are the parents, the caregivers, whatever, because there's all of these biological changes that start with puberty. And once again, sometimes people just look on the outside, the voice is getting deeper, they're growing hair, underneath the arms, on the face. There's all these things that they can see from an outward perspective, but more importantly, the things that are the significant changes are the emotional, cognitive, and the social things. That's more important in terms of really these biological changes that are happening on the outside. What does this whole adolescent brain development look like? Kind of what are the things that are involved in that? We talk about that we need to make sure that we understand what is the impact of trauma, whether it's racial, ethnic, and or gender identity development. Some of these things start coming into play at this point because these young people are very in tune with how these things are impacting who they are or who they want to be, who they are evolving to be. And then we need to identify, develop, and implement developmentally and appropriate support practices with our youth and young adults. So how is it that some of the things that we can possibly do? So what are the things that we can help to do with caregivers. So it talks about that we can help them model developmentally appropriate interactions. Sometimes you just have no idea, how it is that when you see something, that perhaps is a little bit off kilter, you see a parent interfacing with a child that you don't think is necessarily appropriate, or you think there's a better way, then, perhaps you can just pull that parent aside and say, hey, have you thought about perhaps this is a different way that you can have that conversation? This is the different way that you can broach your child. So really, we become the modelers for what these development or appropriate actions look like, so that the parents can in turn do that the next time themselves. It's our job to make sure that we provide them with information and resources so that they will know what are those things that they need and how they can go about getting the things that they do. Encourage caregivers to observe, ask questions, explore parenting and other issues, and to try out new strategies. I think that sometimes this parenting thing, there's no book that tells you there's a right way and there's a wrong way. You got to figure out what's going to work with your child, which means sometimes you may have to try all kinds of strategies before you finally get to the one that finally works with that particular child. But we have to be willing to let people know that you can't just give up. We have to keep exploring and trying to figure out what are the things that are going to work for this specific issue with this specific child. Once again, we don't want to look at all the things that parents are doing wrong. We want to try to figure out what are the things that they're doing from a strength-based perspective, how it is that we can help them see themselves in a positive light. And we want to make sure that we use trauma-informed practices and really train them. What does that look like? Don't always look, why is your child acting a fool? Something is causing your child to behave in this fashion. They're not doing it just for the heck of doing it. And then once again, how is it that we make sure that we incorporate cultural approaches, and we are culturally respective in terms of the way we bring ourselves to the table. And for children and youth that are involved with the systems, when we're talking about whether it's DCF, there's all these different kinds of systems. It could be juvenile justice. There's so many different ways. What is it that we want to make sure that we do? We want to help sure that we meet their developmental needs. We want to make sure that we understand the trauma, the impact of trauma on their development, how it is what that looks like and feels like, and be intentional. I love this word, y'all, intentional. How do we support the capacities of families and caregivers to keep their children safe and support their early development? But not just their early development. I say development across the board. But once again, we talk about the early development. That's the most crucial and critical time, but then we have to just go through all these different other stages. Adolescence is another key and critical time. Okay. So now let's talk about our second protective factors, which talks about social connections. So one of the things when we talk about social connections, and Dr. Donna talked about it in her morning, and I talked about it this morning, and I always talk about it. The first and most important protective factor that we can give to our children is one, caring, loving, safe, supportive adult caregiver relationship. Would we prefer it to be the parent? Absolutely, but sometimes that's not possible. So as long as that is an adult, once again, caring, loving, consistent, safe parental relationship. That is the number one protective factor that you can give to any child. So obviously, if you have more than one of those, it's fantastic. And for me, I can tell you the difference between who I think I might have been, in terms of, I was raised up, with a poor family. My father was an alcoholic. There was, I always felt, economically insecure that, not sure what was going to go on with us. And my parents just really, were not equipped to do the things that I needed them to do. The difference was there were teachers in my life from the day I went to kindergarten to the day, even when I went to work, I figure when I even worked on my master's, there were always teachers. Those were the people that made the difference in my life. Every single grade, there was some special teacher that loved me, that cared for me, that nurtured me, that taught me that these are the things you need to do. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? I would not be here teaching this class today. I would not have any degrees, probably. I would not be married with two beautiful children, with two beautiful grandkids. None of those things would happen had those people not been in my life. So when I tell you, you can make a difference, you can make a difference. And sometimes we have to be that one caring, loving, consistent, and responsible adult. Okay, so when we talk about social connections, what does it look like? talks about positive relationships, not just the fact that we're in connection. Okay, first of all, we are physically, mentally, and emotionally designed to be in connection. That's the way that we are built. So when you are out of connection, you are going against the grain of all those ways in which we are built to be in connection. We have those positive relationships. What can they bring to the table? Emotional, informational, instrumental, and spiritual support. We're going to talk quickly about those on the next slide. But what does it look like? We talk about having multiple friendships and supportive relationships with others. We have a need, I think, to feel respected and appreciated. I love to tell people that they are loved and cherished and valued, because that's how I want to feel. So I love telling people that I care about. And it really talks about accepting help from others and giving help to others. We talk about that reciprocity. This is not a one-way street. I don't have a relationship with you so you can just come asking me all the time, or that I'm giving to you all the time, or that you're giving to me. No. Healthy relationships, there's some sort of reciprocity normally that's built, and it's not tit for tat necessarily. Everything you give me and everybody give me, but there's got to be something that we are both getting and bringing to the relationship. So then we also talk about, so what are some of those skills that we need to think about when we want to establish and maintain those healthy connections? So what do these caregivers, adults, and children want from relationships? So this was just a quick table that I put together. These are just some of the things, and of course it's not a comprehensive list, but some of the things when I think about healthy relationships, I think about love, I think about safety from a physical, emotional, cognitive, and spiritual perspective. I think about trust and support, honesty and accountability, shared responsibility, negotiation and fairness, non-threatening behavior, economic partnership, mutual respect, responsible parenting. Now, some of these apply to adults, but certainly some of these apply to our youth and to our children. What do these things look like? But these are all components of healthy relationships. And that's one of the things when we talk to our parents, when we serve our parents, sometimes they've lived in so much dysfunction, they don't even know what healthy looks like. So how do we have those conversations about what does a healthy relationship really look like, and how is it that you bring yourself to the table to say, this is what I want, and if this is not there, then perhaps I need to be out of this relationship. I love this quote. The quote says what? The relationship very often is an intervention between the relationship, because the relationship is the context within which the young person learns and practices new ways of relating to people. To me, I talk about sometimes the relationship is the intervention itself. Sometimes that relationship is more important than any product or service that you can bring to the table. The relationship that you might have with that child, with that youth, with that parent, with that caregiver, that becomes the context in which we bring ourselves to the table. And that makes all the difference sometimes in the outcomes that we will have with our parents. Your relationships, what does that look like and feel like? So when we talk about healthy social connections, what do they promote? Sense of trust, belonging, a positive regard, shared values, beliefs, and cultures, opportunities to share experiences, a sense that one matters to others. These are all positive elements in terms of when we have healthy social connections. What does that mean? What does it promote within us and with others? We talk about supporting connections. This can be done through multiple relationships. And as we know, you don't get all your needs met in one relationship. So we talk about what does it look like when we go out and start forming different kinds of relationships. Might be personal, might be professional, might be school related, all those different things. We talk about how it is that the importance of managing boundaries. Sometimes that is real key when we come to the table as professionals and dealing with our parents. What do those boundaries look like? How is it they impact the nature of the relationship we can have or cannot have? And we really want to talk to parents about creating healthy relationships. We want to make sure that we do what? Help our children, youth, and caregivers have access to opportunities to think about what does it mean to have a healthy relationship. And as we know, there's all kinds of opportunities, all kinds of settings, all kinds of vehicles where those relationships take place. And this is just some of those. So one of the things I really want to talk about, and we talk about relationships with parents and caregivers, that contrary to popular belief where it says, oh no, once your child starts going through puberty and adolescence, that parent caregiver relationship is not important. If anything, it is more important during childhood and adolescence, because And it's been shown that when children are in healthy relationships with their parents and caregivers during this time, what? That they are psychologically healthier, and that this relationship helps buffers against depression, early sexual activity, violence, alcohol, and marijuana use. I want you to keep in mind, once again, when we talk about these relationships, they can be so different based on what? Social, cultural, and ethnic norms. So we really need to understand, what does that look like from the individuals that we serve, from the parents, the youth, whatever that is, from the community perspective. What does culture, diversity, what are those norms, what are those values, what do they look like, and how it is that we can make sure that we honor the fact that those people are different. We honor their culture, we honor that diversity. How it is that we can do that, and how it is that we kind of let them know, when it's important, what that means in terms of our own personal experience. Our next protective factor talks about cognitive and social and emotional competence, and this really has like two parts to it. It talks about cognitive competence, where it really talks about our mental capacities. So it really talks about our development of executive functions. And even though people say, executive functions, they really, kick off during adolescence, which is they really do. They have a major growth spurt during adolescence. But really, executive functions start from the very beginning. They just look from the very beginning of our children's lives. If they just look and feel differently. But executive functions happen across the board, and they don't. So they really go from zero, and they say that those executive functions are really not done until our mid-20s. So we talked about, what are those executive functions? We know what they are. They're futuristic thinking. They're things, what are the skills? Logical thinking, problem solving, reasoning, all the things we do, we need to be and know to be responsible adults. And basically, that takes place in the the prefrontal cortex in the front of our brains, and it's the last piece to develop. So then we talk about the other part of that, what? Social and emotional competency. There's really three parts to that. One talks about our ability to regulate our emotions, to identify and to regulate those emotions. We talk about effective communications, and then we talk about our ability to have what I call healthy relationships. So this is a two-parter. So how is it that we make sure, our children are cognitively competent, as well as a social and emotional competence? There was a time when, schools only focused on this cognitive competency. Everything was like academically based, but now people are understanding, oh, wow, this social and emotional competence piece is just as important, or even sometimes more important than that academic piece. So when we talk about what are these competencies, if you look under the cognitive piece, what does it say? Our ability to think flexibly, to have future orientation, to have what? Regulation of the way we think, our emotions, to have self-regulation over that. How do we self-regulate our behavior, planning, working memory? And these are not all of the competencies for cognitive. Those are just some of them. And when we talk about social emotional, what do those competencies look like? They look like how it is that we are self-aware. What is our self-concept? Do we have self-esteem? Do we have compassion for ourselves and for other people, for empathy? Do we understand what personal agency looks like? What are the strengths of our character and some of the just positive emotions? So once again, these are not a comprehensive list, but they certainly talk about within those two realms, what are some of the competencies that we want to make sure that our children, that our youth have. They lay the foundation for forming independent identity, and they also promote responsible and satisfying adulthood. And that's really what we want for our children and our youth. So what does it look like from a caregiver perspective versus from the child-adolescent perspective? So as a caregiver, what do I need to bring to the table when I talk about social and emotional competence? First of all, the definition says what? Family and child interactions that help children and adolescents develop the ability to communicate clearly, recognize and regulate their emotions, and to establish and maintain relationships, right? Communications, emotions, and relationships. From a caregiver perspective, it says warm and consistent responses that fosters a strong and secure attachment with the child, encouraging and reinforcing social skills and setting limits, helping them understand boundaries are not here to restrict you. Boundaries are here to keep you safe. From the child-adolescent perspective, what is age appropriate in terms of self-regulation, their ability to form and maintain relationships with others, positive interactions with others, and effective communications. So what is the importance of social and emotional competence? When we have children that have a strong foundation for that, these are the things that they're able to do. Okay? So when we talk about where are the areas and where are the opportunities where they can possibly have the development of these social and emotional cognitive opportunities, we talk about, once again, there's a variety of settings. We talk about the fact that, and we also want to make sure that that they have experiences that allow them to tap into their interests, explore who they are, to try to figure out, because a lot of times our kids are going through gender, cultural, ethnic identities at this point. So we want them to be able to figure out who they are. We want them to seek more independence and responsibility as they're growing into these wonderful emerging adults. Give them opportunities to think about their values and morals and allow personal choices, try on new experiences, and strive to reach new potential. Our next one is concrete support in times of need. This one is important because it really talks about individuals' ability to access to concrete support and services that address a family's needs and help them minimize stress caused by challenges. So it really gives them an opportunity of what does it look like to seek and accept support. They need to know what services are available and how to access them, and really the idea of having financial stability to make sure that the parents and the caregivers, that the basic needs are being met. Because if you cannot provide for food, shelter, clothing, some level of financial responsibility for your kids, you are not going to be focused on whatever it is somebody else is bringing to the table unless you're meeting one of those needs. Doctor already talked about this morning about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and basically at the bottom, we need to make sure that the basic needs of our families are being met. Our physiological needs, their safety needs, then it goes up to their belonging, esteem. So we're saying people are not going to be able to self-actualize. They're not going to figure out who I am, what this potential is, what are all the one of the things I should be able to do. If I'm hungry, if I don't have a place to sleep, if I'm if I don't have food, clothing, and shelter. So we've got to make sure that we meet the very basic, at a minimum, the basic physiological and safety needs and belonging needs, hopefully, of our families. We talk about concrete support in terms of, remember I talked about that it could provide emotional support, informational support, instrumental support, and spiritual support. So once again, think about that these are in the context of relationships. So in terms of being a relationship, having those positive social connections, these are things that people can bring to the table in terms of each one of those areas. We want to make sure that we promote help seeking. And these are ways that we want to make sure that we were providing coordinated products and services, that we understood that, we're one size doesn't fit all. We're trying to meet those individual needs. We want to make sure that what we bring to the table is culturally responsive, that we meet it, in a timely fashion, that once again, we bring ourselves to the table in all that we do in terms of respect and trust, and that we give them the best information we have on these products and services, and when we connect them to referrals. And once again, we want to make sure that we support that whatever we provide, that is supporting the development of the skills and the use of the tools to help them identify what are the things that they need and how do we connect them to those supports. We'll talk about self-advocacy. One of the things that we teach them, we want to just basically help them to know what it is they need, how to speak up for themselves, and how to have control over some of the decisions in their life. And what are some of the key characteristics for successful caregiving and transition into adulthood. The last protective factor is resilience. I'm going to quickly talk about that, and this is a quick 2-minute video. Hold on just a second. Hopefully it will be up here shortly.
Why do some people do well despite serious hardships? The science of resilience can help us find answers.
We define resilience as a good outcome in the face of adversity. The extent to which we can build capacities in all children early in their lives, to be able to deal with whatever bumps in the road or major obstacles may be coming down the track. That's an investment in building strong human capital, healthy, productive adults.
Some children face more obstacles and adversity than others.
It's like having a parent with a major mental illness, growing up in a very socioeconomically disadvantaged community, going to schools that are not good, being exposed to violence in the neighborhood or in the home.
But some children do well despite these significant obstacles.
Resilience is that ability or set of capacities for positive adaptation, allowing you to keep in balance.
We're talking about the kinds of capacities and skills and the abilities that give people a sense of mastery and management of difficulty.
It's tempting to think about children as either having this resilient quality or not. But resilience is built over time, just as an whole with how the architecture of the brain is built over time.
It's not just in the person, it's in the interaction between the person and the environment.
So we care about resilience for the same reason that we care about promoting healthy development, because in many respects it is the same. We are interested in promoting resilience in children so that, despite the odds, more and more children can grow up to be productive citizens.
Okay, so when we talk about what resilience is, what does it say? It's the process of managing stress and functioning well, even when faced with challenges, adversity, or trauma or history. Okay, so when we talk about stressors, these are just some of the many stressors that some of our children and our youth and our families have to deal with. I'm going to quickly go through this last section. So why is resilience important? Because what? It allows us to face challenges, make those great decisions, be responsible for our actions, influence what? The development and well-being of our children. And if we understand the concept of how to be resilient, we're more likely to have healthy outcomes. We can remain strong even when we're stressed. We know how to take care of ourselves. We know how to ask for help. We know how to feel good about ourselves. And we have a feeling of being hopeful. We know how to plan for the future and what we need to do in challenging situations. And hopefully these two are really important. Avoid allowing stress to get in the way of providing loving care for our children. Think about the times when we're stressed and how does that impact what parenting looks like and feels like. And really, it still talks about the fact that we still need to what? Take time to enjoy our children, our child, and what we really love and like about parenting. The science of resilience really talks about there's all these developmental challenges, which are on the left: poverty, neglect, abuse, trauma, violence, mental illness. But then it really talks about how it is that those positive promotive factors, what do they look like and feel like? They're on the right-hand side. What does the skilled caregiver look like? What are those relationships, the power of relationships? Safety, financial security. How do we learn how to manage stress? How do we problem solve? How do we regulate behavior and plan ahead of time? So when we talk about resilient caregivers and youth, you can read these. Basically, it talks about that they have all these wonderful things going on. I love this slide. So when it talks about resilience and culture, it says resilience is more likely to occur when we provide the services, supports, and healthy resources that make it more likely for every child to do well in ways that are meaningful to his or her family and community. That's the operative word, not meaningful to you, but what's meaningful to that child and or their family and community. In this sense, resilience is the result of both successful navigation to the appropriate resources and negotiation for the resources that we provided in a meaningful way. That is powerful. So how is it that we can build resilience? We talk about providing opportunities to make sure that our children and parents have voice, choice, personal responsibility. They develop self-regulation, self-reflection, self-confidence, self-compassion, And there's talked about implicit bias. There's a test that you can go take at Harvard, and there's also a website, the Quran resource. Oh my God, they have all this wonderful stuff on culture and diversity. We talk about the idea that we want to provide them with experiences that support relationships with other adults, both peers and adults, and real opportunities for productive decision making, and to engage in what I call constructive engagement. Okay, so the last goal was for me to provide you with a list of resources from the Center for the Study of Social Policy. These are those resources. I've got them highlighted in terms of whether they're Family Thrive, whether they're the Strengthening Families, or whether they're the Youth Thrive. This is one of my favorite quotes of all times from Maya Angelou. She says, "I have learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." So I think about every time when I have a conversation with someone, when I'm trying to engage them and have them engage me, or I'm trying to, just really build a relationship, I think about how is it that I made them feel? Did I make them feel good about that interaction? Or did something I say was offensive, or something that I wasn't aware possibly have hurt their feelings? And if so, I immediately apologize, and I let people know I do care about you. So we have to be so careful, once again, about the way that we make people feel. We want our families to feel safe. We want our families to feel connected to us. So just, as you leave this experience, just kind of want you to think about, hopefully you learned some things, and to go back and just think about, some of the things we've shared. So thank you for coming to the Youth Thrive, the Families Thrive overview, where we've spent some time talking about those promotive and protective factors. I know I talked kind of fast. I covered a lot of information, but once again, keep in mind that this is just really a small part of the class. Once again, this is my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me. We don't have a whole lot of time to answer Q&As that you might have, but if you want to email me, if you want to call me, I will be more than willing to answer any of the questions that you might have. And I really do look forward to hopefully hearing from some of you and working with you to provide some training on either this Strengthening Families, the Youth Thrive, the Families Thrive, or a multitude of other classes that I offer. So thank you for coming. I hope that you all have a blessed day. And once again, thank you for the way that you bring yourselves to the table, the way that you serve our families, and for just all that you do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. And I can just feel your kind of commitment and purpose, because I made that big screw up early on where I kicked you out, and you were so kind to me.
Girl,
this is a woman who walks her walk. I just wanted to say that. There was a request in the chat, if you could go back to the slide that had the resources in it. Someone was very interested in that. I don't know if you can at this point. And there's lots of great presentation. Thank you so much. And share or to share it in the chat, if you could do that. I don't know if you can do that at this point, and I don't have those resources with me. Let me see if I can do that.
Okay. Celine, can you see my screen?
I can.
Okay, so I'm on that particular slide.
Wonderful. So I think that was Elizabeth who wanted that. So we have that up there for you, Elizabeth. And I have also pasted in the chat just a little earlier a link to the feedback. We would like to know what you thought about this session with Maria. And I've also put her contact information in there if you would like that. You can also contact Maria or other speakers through the different avenues in the session. You can go to Expo or go to the stage, go to networking, and you'll find some information there. Thank you so much for coming to this event, and we appreciate your interest in helping families thrive. And I've learned some things about how to help myself and my daughter, my own family, to just be better with each other. So I appreciate that, Maria, and your kindness. I really, really appreciate that.
You are cracking me up, Celine. Thank you for your support.
Absolutely.
Okay? And I really do want to have a special shout out to Kelsey Visser. When I tell you that I could not have done this without Kelsey, because I am totally technology inept, she was so patient and so kind, and it was just like hats off to Kelsey is all I have to say. Okay, everybody?
Okay, yeah, that sounds like Kelsey.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you all for coming. I really, really appreciate it.
And I'm just going to stay in here for a little while to see people are leaving. You can go to the expo. You could go to the networking opportunity. There isn't really anything in the stage right now, or to reception. Or you can hang out with Maria and I for a little bit. Is it still raining where you are, Maria?
It looks like it stopped. I had closed my windows earlier because it was raining so hard, but it looks like it finally stopped. If it isn't, and if it's raining, then it's just sprinkling because I can hardly hear it.
Yeah, it's just come over to me. It just started pouring.
Uh-oh.
It's been drizzling most of the morning, and now it's pouring.
Okay. Okay.
So, do you work with organizations in the Central Florida area, Maria?
Yes. Yeah. I work across the board, especially since we've gotten in this, even though I live in Daytona, basically because everything is virtual, it's been perfect. So last year I did a lot of training across the state of Florida. I had a contract with the system of care people who belong to the Department of Children and Families. So I did some training on Youth Vibe. I did some training on these things called parent cafes, which teach you how to take these protective factors and put them in kind of in a cafe dialogue, which is another part.
Yeah.
Yeah. So last year I did a lot of training across the state because of this virtual environment. So I am very open, to work with anybody, just anywhere.
Oh, that's good to know. So Bridget Vale or Val and Maria Shorkey said hi.
Hello.
People you know?
Maybe. I mean, no, you know how when you're a trainer, there are so many people that, it's hard when you're a trainer. Yeah, unless I've had some one-on-one work with you, it's hard for me sometimes to remember people. I trained so many people last year.
Right.
It was a good year, though. It was really a good year. And it was a good year in terms of just reaching people.
And the application piece, I can see how the World Cafe model would be really good to help people apply all of these ideas into their lives. And with those six areas, I can see how that model would work so well with people moving from table to table and really learning things from each other.
That's what, and the power is when people bring themselves to the table, because it's based on, there's a cafe deck of cards, so we don't have to figure out what the questions are. So for each one of the protective factors, there's an organization called Be Strong Families. They actually produce the cards, so we buy the cards. But I teach them how to use the cards, how to do the cafe, and people really kind of make it their own. But it's such a powerful way to engage parents in a different way, because it's not like I'm here to say, no. It's like we're all sharing how it is, our experiences, our insights, our perspective, whatever it is that the question is on these cards that relate to each one of those protective factors. It's pretty powerful.
Yeah, I can see how it would be. And when people learn a kind of framework like this, they really need the application piece to really get it to sink home. Just because, that's the way we learn best, is to use all those different modalities. So the processing piece is so critical for us to really be able to integrate actions that are protective into our personal lives with our children. And I'm even thinking about that with my siblings and, my mother, who is much older, but looking at her from this lens of, how do I be protective of her in our relationship now that she's at another end of life. I mean, she's 88. So,
wow.
So
That's
thank you.
phenomenal. Wow.
We never stop growing, do we? And learning. And
never. We don't.
The brain.
And the power is we learn from each other. I learn from you, you learn from me, I learn from other people. And, and it's different in the class because it's interactive. This was a one-way presentation, but it's so different when people bring their experiences and their insights and their perspectives and their skills and their knowledge. Sometimes the class is so powerful, and it's always powerful when that happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
Woo,
yeah, I would love to be at one of those. So
absolutely.
I know what they're like when you're in that kind of environment and everyone is sharing and there's such truth and vulnerability in the room that, people just gain incredible insights into what's effective for them. And so many people learn through the sharing. Adana was talking about the writing. And that is a modality to healing, but also in sharing, that's another modality to healing. So, I can see how that would be really powerful with the cards.
It is, I'm telling you, and it's a different way to broach the same subject. This is not like, but part of, when we teach people how to do the cafe, though, I do the day-long strengthening family. So I just really talk about, from a strength, so they understand those protective factors. Then we do the piece and this is how you do, the dialogue piece. Then, it's really about people kind of take that dialogue piece sometimes and have their own couple little pieces to customize. Because I say you need to make it your own.
Right.
I'm going to give you the framework. I'm going to give you kind of these are some important pieces, but people really need to make it their own.
Absolutely.
What's reflective of the people that you're serving, the community, and hopefully you're having parents that are going to actually help you put this cafe together. This is not about providers rolling out. This is about providers working with families. Once again, that partnership, we've got to reframe and change the way that we look at our families and our caregivers. We've got to be in partnership with them if we want this thing to work, because they are the experts in their families. We are not.
Right. Yeah. And that was a big takeaway for me, was that notion that you mentioned of serving, of, that's what we're doing. We're serving. We're not.
We're serving. We are serving. And that is a blessing each and every day. For me, it's a blessing.
Yeah. We still have 11 people on the call. So they're listening to us chat. And I imagine that they're interested in, what you have to offer and are curious as to, how they might bring this or use this. So I encourage you to connect with Maria. And we appreciate you being here.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Maria. So nice to meet you. I don't know when I'll see you again, but I hope I do.
Thank you so much for your support.
Oh, and thanks for being here.
Okay, sweetie. Everybody have a blessed day.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye.